What does it mean to constitute? When we make something, we do so using things and with a specific intent. Take a knife. It is made from metal, shaped into certain dimensions, weight, and balance, and for one mission, which is to cut. The knife is not a cup. It cannot hold liquid. It is not a bowling ball. It is not a flower pot. Nothing in the design, the clauses, or the maker's instructions allows the knife to serve any purpose other than what it was intended. So let's agree. To constitute means to create with purpose. If you write a love poem for a friend, you choose the paper, the pen, and you select the words to send a particular message, and you shape the tone to match your intention. The poem is not a legal brief. It is not a horror story. By its very constitution, like the knife, it has boundaries that keep it true to its nature. The founders of the United States of America understood this. When they framed the U.S. Constitution, they were not drafting an abstract idea. They were building something very specific, a structure made of words and principles designed to form and bind a federal government. And this Constitution, like the knife, like the poem, cannot by deception be turned into anything else. This famous document is not a knife. It is not a bowling ball. It is not a love poem. The Constitution of the United States creates and controls the federal government. We must be firm about this. The Constitution was written to secure our freedom. It is not the source of our freedom. Even the Bill of Rights, another creation, was written with a clear and limited purpose: to prohibit government from doing what it has no authority to do. Patrick Henry said it plainly, quote, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government," end quote. But to understand how to constitute anything, especially freedom, we must first understand what that freedom is. John Locke described liberty as, quote, "to be free from restraint and violence from others, which cannot be where there is no law," end quote. Freedom is not chaos. It is the natural condition of man, bound only by the equal rights of his neighbor. And even a carefully built frame can be broken if the limits are ignored or erased. This was the great debate over the Bill of Rights. Thomas Jefferson argued in 1787 that a Bill of Rights would guard against abuse. Quote, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, and what no just government should refuse," end quote. But Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 84 warned of a danger, that by listing some rights, we might suggest all others were surrendered. The Ninth Amendment resolved this issue. Quote, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people," end quote. Yet over time, two dangerous phrases have crept into our language, quote, "constitutional rights" and "civil rights," end quote. They sound harmless, but they imply that rights come from government, and what government gives, government can take away, governed by natural law. The Constitution was built to preserve that very condition, a carefully measured frame designed for justice and for nothing more. Freedom is the open meadow. It is without a fence, without a master, or a hand to pull us back. It is the birthright of every man and woman. It does not come from parchment or from promises of politicians. Robert Heinlein put it simply, quote, "In the absence of order, there is chaos. In the absence of freedom, there is tyranny, end quote. Freedom is the natural condition into which we are born. It can be limited only by the equal rights of another. The founders understood this. They knew government is not the giver of liberty. It is, at best, its guardian. That is why they wrote the Constitution with boundaries, not to control the people, but to control the power that governs them. Chief Justice John Marshall affirmed in Marbury versus Madison, quote, "The powers of the legislature are defined and limited, and that those limits may not be mistaken or forgotten, the Constitution is written," end quote. James Madison in Federalist number 45 reminded us, quote, "The powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite," end quote. Freedom thrives only when those limits are honored, when the meadow is kept open and the fence is built to keep the government in, not to keep the people out. Even a carefully built frame can be broken if the limits are ignored or erased. This was the great debate over the Bill of Rights. Thomas Jefferson argued in 1787 that a Bill of Rights would guard against abuse. Quote, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, and what no just government should refuse," end quote. But Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 84 warned of a danger, that by listing some rights, we might suggest all others were surrendered. The Ninth Amendment resolved this issue. Quote, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people," end quote. Yet over time, two dangerous phrases have crept into our language, quote, "constitutional rights" and "civil rights," end quote. They sound harmless, but they imply that rights come from government, and what government gives, government can take away. Consider this. Have you ever wondered how Congress, meant to be chained by a short list of powers, ended up ruling almost every corner of our lives? It wasn't by accident. It was by twisting a few words in the Constitution into weapons of control. First, the Commerce Clause, written to regulate trade across state lines. It was stretched into a blank check, allowing Washington to dictate everything from farming wheat in your backyard to the rules of our workplaces. Second, the General Welfare Clause, intended as a boundary to keep spending for the common defense and benefit, was turned into a license to spend on anything politicians can dream up: welfare programs, subsidies, and entitlements that bind citizens to government. Third, the Necessary and Proper Clause. Once a modest tool to carry out enumerated powers, it became the quote-unquote elastic clause, stretched to justify entire federal agencies, national banks, and endless regulation far beyond what was written. Fourth, the Supremacy Clause, meant only to ensure that federal law was supreme in its rightful sphere. It has now been twisted to trample state sovereignty, even in areas that the Constitution never gave Washington control. Fifth, the spending and taxing powers. Instead of funding government, they became tools of coercion. States were forced into compliance under threat of losing federal dollars, while taxes and penalties were used to manipulate private choices. Sixth, the 14th Amendment's Enforcement Clause. Passed to secure liberty after the Civil War, it has been wielded as a federal sledgehammer over civil rights, education, voting, and state governance, often beyond correcting true violations. And finally, war powers and emergency declarations. These open-ended grants have been the excuse to suspend limits altogether, expanding federal reach under the guise of crisis. Together, these clauses, distorted by Congress and upheld by pliant courts, form the scaffolding of federal overreach. What were once chains on Washington, D.C., have been melted down into shackles on the American people. If we are to restore liberty, we must tear down the false empire built upon those twisted interpretations and return to a republic of consent, not coercion. In truth, our rights do not flow from any statute, any office, or any man. They are inherent, given by our Creator, and bound only by the equal rights of others. Government exists for one purpose: to secure those rights, not to grant them, not to regulate them into privileges. The moment we forget this, the fence, the barrier around the government breaks, and the meadow of freedom begins to vanish. Words shape nations, and some words quietly steal liberty. Two of the most dangerous are what I have mentioned already: constitutional rights and civil rights. They sound noble. They are repeated in schools, echoed in courtrooms, and worn like shiny badges by politicians. But here is the truth. These phrases shift the source of our rights from nature to government. And what government gives, government can certainly take away. Some in public office use these terms without knowing the harm. They've never studied the terms, much less know the difference. Others use them knowingly, because dependency makes power permanent. If our right to speak is granted by law, it can be restricted by law. If our right to defend ourselves is given by statute, it can be taken by statute. This is not liberty. It is a license, and it is revocable at will. The founders rejected this thinking. They knew that rights were not favors. They were not created by ink on paper. They are inherent. They exist because we exist, and the only role of government is to secure them. Once we forget this point, we begin to beg for permission to live free. And a free people should never beg. A man who understands freedom knows the limits of a constitution. He knows it is not a blank check for power. It is a frame built for specific ends and for nothing more. This man seeks nothing from government but justice. He does not ask it to feed him, to clothe him, or to direct his life. He lives by a simple maxim: he is free so long as he does not violate the life, liberty, or property of another. In this, he is both sovereign and responsible. He does not envy the possessions of his neighbor. He does not petition for the earnings of others. He asks only to be left alone and to leave others in peace. Frederick Bastiat wrote, quote, "Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws," end quote. When a man lives by this truth, he needs no constant supervision. He requires no master. He is governed from within by conscience and principle. The founders built the Constitution for men like this, for citizens capable of governing themselves. The more such men there are, the less government is needed. The fewer there are, the more government becomes a cage for itself alone. To constitute freedom is to build a world where liberty is the default and control is the rare exception. It is to arrange society so that each man and woman may walk their own path, bound only by the equal rights of others. In such a place, commerce is honest because fraud is punished. Speech is free because no man fears his neighbor's opinion. Property is secure because theft by private hand or public office is forbidden. Government has but one mission: to protect the boundaries, not to dictate the journey. It does not measure our lives. It measures only its actions against justice. Samuel Adams described this ideal, quote, "Among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, a right to life; secondly, to liberty; thirdly, to property, together with a right to defend them in the best manner they can." In a constituted freedom, charity is voluntary, success is earned, responsibility is personal. It is a society that thrives on trust between neighbors and mistrust toward concentrated power. The Constitution was meant to be the blueprint for this world, a frame that holds power in check so that the meadow of freedom stays open for every generation to walk. Ignorance is the most fertile soil for tyranny. When a people forget the meaning of freedom, they forget the limits that bind their government. And when they forget what it means to constitute, they forget that their constitution is a thing built for a purpose and for nothing more. Out of this ignorance, a monster grows, a government that no longer fears its master, a government that believes itself to be the source of rights, the owner of property, the keeper of every man's will. History shows this pattern. James Madison warned, quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary," end quote. We are not governed by angels, and when the people stop enforcing the controls, power expands into every space it can reach. What begins as a protector becomes a regulator, then a master. The tragedy is that much of this happens with the consent of the people themselves. They trade the hard work of liberty for the false security of dependency. They forget that every promise from government comes at the cost of someone else's freedom. The price of ignorance is not paid in theory. It is paid in chains. The only cure is to remember what freedom is, to remember what it means to constitute, and to remember that the power to preserve liberty has always been ours. The Constitution is not broken. It is simply not enforced. It is ignored. The Constitution has taken over the entire meadow of freedom and more. The problem is not that liberty has failed. It is that we have failed to preserve it. Our rights are not gifts from Congress. They are not privileges of citizenship. They are not negotiable contracts between ruler and subject. They are natural. They exist because we exist. The only just purpose of government is to secure our natural rights, and in doing so, it fulfills its one true aim, which is justice. When government steps beyond that mission, it acts without authority, and every such act is void. Thomas Jefferson reminded us, quote, "The two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution so it will not become the legalized version of the first," end quote. Those chains are forged by the people's will, by their knowledge, by their courage to say no more. Restoration of America will not come from politicians. It will come from citizens who know their rights, who refuse to be ruled by dependency, who insist that justice, not control, is the ultimate end of government. It begins when we speak truth plainly. There is no such thing as a constitutional right. There are only rights that we are born with and a constitution that exists to protect them. It grows when we reject language of servitude, when we stop begging for permission to be free. And it is fulfilled when the people once again hold their government within the frame that was built for it. The meadow of liberty is still there. We must hack away the government's thorny vines, deep roots, and deep presence. We need only the will to clear it, repair it, and walk it again as free men and women. Most of those in elected office are as ignorant as the people who voted for them. Secondly, those elected are often laden with destructive passions that do not serve our best interests. Vanity and the hunger for power, for example, they alone pervert the words of the Constitution. As such, our guards against them and against their ignorance and intentions must be that much more stringent. Then there are those who work for the government. They are equally ignorant, and worse, they are controlled by systems. Even the military is filled with officers who know nothing but the system. They may wear the uniform, they may hold the rank, but they are not wise regarding the limits of the Constitution. They do not grasp the nuances of its words. They speak of quote-unquote constitutional rights as if they are saying something of merit, when in truth, they are repeating an error that serves us no good. I have friends who are generals who served in the armed forces, and I tell you plainly, these protectors of the Constitution, men who have taken an oath to preserve and defend it, do not know what it is. Yes, this is a bold assertion, but I stand by my claim. From junior officers to military flag officers to congressmen, and then to Supreme Court justices and the president, our government is littered with people who have no proper context for this founding document. Now, if you doubt it, you need only weigh the evidence. For example, an unsustainable national debt, the highest incarceration rate in the world, a swelling mass of statutes, codes, and regulations, and a steady erosion of liberty with each passing decade. This is not fruit born of wisdom, but destruction sourced in ignorance in high places. And it is killing the American Republic from within. Where does this leave us and our vast meadow of freedom? A meadow without boundaries save one, which is the violation of another's life, liberty, and property. Where does it leave the Constitution of the United States, except as something that was never truly intended? If the Constitution, with its weight, dimensions, words, concepts, and its deliberate intent, is not honored, then it is no longer a founding document of rigid constraints. No, it is a relic of a past that no longer exists, an artifact of fascination and faux elevation, when such admiration is misplaced, misapplied, and misunderstood. Sadly, the Constitution is replaced with something else, something the founders never constructed, wrote, or constituted. And this something else is sinister and the antithesis of freedom. Why? All because of our ignorance of what the Constitution was and is. If only honored, respected, and enforced, we the people and ignorant people would understand. But now we hoist lofty praise for a restrictive parchment that no longer serves its hallowed purpose. Instead, a supposedly free people clutches and clamors for government numbers and checks, for handouts and benefits galore, the very things that the federal government was never designed to provide. And so the government has gone from defender of liberty to destroyer of a once free people. Where does that leave the American Republic? What is the solution to a federal government that no longer operates within the confines of its original charter? Is there a way to restore and preserve the chains that bind powers so that they cannot be more than intended? There is a solution, because the Constitution of the United States is not a bowling ball, not a knife, and not a love poem. It is a binding agreement, a framework designed to limit government power. On this Constitution Day, September 17th, 2025, we can resolve once and for all to impose and to adhere to the limitations of government. There is a concept called de jure. It is the opposite of de facto. De jure means by law. It is something rightful, lawful, and legitimate, recognized under the Constitution, even if it's not currently in power. De facto means in fact. It is something that exists in practice, even if it has no legal authority. If a constitutionally elected governor is removed unlawfully and replaced by someone who seizes the office, the removed governor is still the governor, while the usurper is merely de facto in power and unlawful. Our natural rights and freedoms are de jure. They exist even today. If we operate under de jure principles, natural law, and the true designs of the Constitution, the governors of the several states can secure what was originally intended. A de jure governor who honors both the state and federal constitutions is a bulwark against oppressive forces, protecting the free while still serving those who choose to remain federal subjects within the state. This is the easiest and surest way to restore the sovereignty of the 50 states and the liberty of their citizens. A governor acting in de jure authority can stop any transgression that exceeds rightful power. The details are secondary to the courage of a man or woman willing to cage government power in its rightful place. Imagine if the states refused to be the mouthpiece of federal schemes. Imagine if they declared again and again that the people are free and must be left alone unless they violate the life, liberty, or property of another. This Constitution Day is not just another date. It is the line in the sand, the day of restoration, the moment we reclaim the birthright of freedom for ourselves and for our posterity. The Republic cannot be saved from Washington, D.C. It must be restored in the states, one governor, one act of truth, one free man or woman at a time. Most Americans believe they are free, yet they live under a system that governs by assumption and presumption, not consent. The truth is simple. You are only governed by that to which you consent. A de jure governor knows this truth and acts upon it, governing by right, not by presumption, by consent, not coercion, by the state constitution, not by federal decree. This is the meaning of de jure, lawful, rightful, legitimate. It is time to return to this treasured understanding. A de jure governor refuses unlawful federal mandates, nullifies unconstitutional laws, protects state nationals who lawfully withdraw from federal jurisdiction, and restores natural rights and lawful governance in the state. This is not theory. It's the rightful role of a governor under the Constitution and natural law. It is the difference between freedom by consent and control by assumption and presumption. De jure means by law. De facto means in fact. Today we live mostly under de facto governance, power that exists in practice but lacks lawful authority. Licenses, silent agreements, and assumed obligations keep people bound without their knowing consent. A de jure governor exposes this system and restores the option to live lawfully, peacefully, and free. This is not rebellion, it is lawful correction. Do you know someone who refuses to bow to unlawful power, who believes in truth, sovereignty, and the consent of the governed? We must nominate and support candidates in every state, men and women who will act as de jure governors, those who understand natural rights and reject unconstitutional federal overreach, those who will act courageously, lawfully, and without compromise. If you are that person or know someone who is, now is the time to act. We cannot and will not continue under the false comfort of de facto rule. We must return to the lawful authority of de jure governance. De facto oppression assumes and presumes that our silence is our consent. De jure demands our voice, our action, and our courage. The Republic's restoration will not come from Washington, D.C. It begins in our states, with our governors, and with us. Let me show you what this looks like. Consider that a de jure governor would not rule, but serve. He would serve the people, and the people would be declared sovereign, with government as their servant, not their master. The governor's charter would be a public record of lawful intent and peaceful redress. It affirms that no man or woman shall be compelled into any jurisdiction without knowing and voluntary consent. We will no longer confuse legal with lawful. What is lawful springs from natural law, equity, and justice, not from corporate codes and administrative decrees or the presumptive ignorance of arrogant officials. From this day forward, the supremacy of lawful authority will be recognized above what is merely legal. De jure governors would protect the right of any man or woman who, by affidavit and declaration, withdraws from federal statutory jurisdiction and limited state and local control. Moreover, no state agency would harass, penalize, or target anyone for their lawful status. Instead, the de jure governor would establish an office of status and recognition, for example, to preserve and defend the rights of state nationals who choose to live under lawful and limited state constitutional authority. This is not rebellion. It is the restoration of the compact between free people and their limited servant government. The de jure governor would restore the right of the people to create and operate courts of record under common law. These courts would hear disputes and preserve affidavits as well as provide lawful remedy outside of statutory control. A de jure governor recognizes that justice is not a bureaucratic process. It is a moral imperative rooted in the rights of the people. With the state rejecting all federal mandates, programs, and funding schemes that violate the sovereignty of the people, coercion, forced compliance, and presumed jurisdiction are unlawful under natural law principles. A de jure governor would defend against this oppression. The chains of federal and state overreach will be replaced with the bonds of lawful consent. A de jure governor will teach the difference between lawful and legal, the original principles of the republic, and how to peacefully withdraw from unjust and freedom-defeating systems. An educated people will never again allow themselves to be governed by presumption, ignorance, or fear. A de jure governor's charter is not a call to arms. It is a call to peace, freedom, truth, and lawful restoration. The people are not the property of the state. They are free. And it is the sacred duty of the de jure governor to recognize and protect that very freedom today and for all generations to come. Imagine this. A man born and raised in his state has never worked for the federal government, has never sought a federal contract, or has revoked any and all federal benefits. He lives under the protection of state law and the natural law rights with which he was born. Yet one day the IRS sends him a letter threatening civil and criminal action, claiming that he owes a federal income tax. Under the governance we have today, he would fight that battle alone. But under a de jure governor, it would be very, very different. A de jure governor would issue a sworn affidavit that this man is a state national and not lawfully within federal jurisdiction. He would be considered under the protection of the state's sovereignty as well as his own personal sovereignty. This affidavit would stand as evidentiary proof and official record that the federal claim has no lawful foundation. No federal court would overrule such a stand, because to do so would be to spark the very conflict that the Constitution was designed to prevent, a direct clash between state sovereignty and federal overreach. The IRS would have no ground to advance a criminal charge, no lawful basis for a civil suit. The state, standing firmly behind a state national, becomes a wall that could not be breached. This is not defiance for defiance sake. It is the lawful execution of the governor's duty to protect the unalienable rights of the people and to reject any lawful presumption of federal control. When a state asserts its rightful authority and its governor acts in de jure capacity, the federal government knows there is a line it cannot cross. And for the first time in living memory, every state national who chooses freedom will have the shield they have always deserved. Imagine a family living on land that's been in their hands for generations. They have clear title and owe no debt to the federal government. Yet one day, a state or federal agency claims authority over that land, maybe for environmental regulations, maybe for eminent domain. Under today's system, the family is forced into years of litigation, fighting in courts that already presume federal supremacy. But under a de jure governor, the scenario changes. A de jure governor issues a sworn affidavit that this land and its owners exist wholly within the jurisdiction of the sovereign state and outside the scope of unlawful state and federal authority. That affidavit becomes evidentiary proof, a lawful certification that the state and federal governments lack jurisdiction. No judge would risk overruling a governor's direct assertion of state sovereignty, because to do so would be to ignite a constitutional conflict between the separate and co-equal governments of the United States and the illegal operation of state authorities. the agency would be forced to withdraw, and the land would remain with the family. And the precedent would be clear that the state stands as a guardian against unlawful intrusion. This is what de jure governance means. It is not a slogan. It is power used lawfully to defend the people. Now imagine this. A state national is arrested under a federal gun law, a statute that violates both the Second Amendment and the state constitution. In the current system, that person would be prosecuted in federal court with little hope of avoiding conviction. But under a de jure governor, the process stops before it starts. A de jure governor would issue an affidavit that the accused is a state national exercising rights protected under the state constitution and not subject to the challenged federal statute. This is more than political posturing. It is a legal wall backed by the authority of the state's highest executive. Federal prosecutors know that pursuing the case would mean challenging the sovereignty of the state itself, a battle they do not want to fight, and one the Constitution does not allow them to win. The case would be dismissed. The right to keep and bear arms remains intact. This is what happens when the governor stands not as a manager of federal and state programs, but as the guardian of the people's liberty. Let me be clear. No government that claims to serve a free and sovereign people can tax their very right to own the ground beneath their feet. Property taxes are not a public service. They are a perpetual rent, a declaration that the state, not the people, holds ultimate title to the land. Under de jure governance, this is unacceptable. If you can lose your home or farm because you could not pay an annual fee to servants in government, then you do not own your land. You lease it from the state. And that is not sovereignty. Natural law says that what you rightfully acquire is yours, free of interference, so long as you do not harm another. The original intent of our state constitution recognized property as a right, not as a privilege granted by a taxing authority. A de jure governor will move to abolish ad valorem property taxes and restore allodial title to the people of his state. Government will fund itself through lawful means, specific user fees, voluntary contracts, and excises that do not touch the ownership of homes, land, and means of production. Our property will once again be an extension of our sovereignty, not a ledger entry in a tax office. This is more than policy. It is the rightful restoration of ownership and the permanent end to the lie that you are a tenant in your own home. Under de jure governance, the people are sovereign, and sovereigns do not pay rent to their servants. When a de jure governor says he will end state property taxes, the defenders of the status quo will ask, quote, "But how will we fund schools, roads, and local services?" End quote. The answer is simple. We will replace the tax with lawful, voluntary, and transparent revenue streams that respect ownership and preserve sovereignty. First, specific user fees. If one uses a service, he pays for that service directly. Road maintenance, utilities, and certain works will be funded by those who use them, not by taxing those who do not. Second, voluntary contracts and local compacts. Communities may freely choose to pool resources for schools, fire protection, and other services. No one is forced, but those who value the service contribute to its upkeep. Third, lawful excise and transaction revenues. Under de jure governance, we may apply narrow, transparent excises on certain commercial activities, but never on the ownership of our homes, land, or our livelihoods. Fourth, restoring efficiency by ending federal dependence. Much of our current tax burden exists to comply with federal programs and mandates. Once we refuse those mandates, we eliminate the overhead and the expense that they create. The truth is, property taxes have never been about fairness. They are about control. They ensure that no man or woman can live free of the state's claim to ultimate ownership. We will break that chain. We will prove that a state can thrive with services funded by consent, not coercion. Under de jure governance, schools will teach, roads will be maintained, communities will flourish, and your home will be yours, both in law and in fact, for as long as you choose to keep it. Let's assert for the importance of Constitution Day the distinction between lawful and legal. Lawful is true. It is rooted in natural law and in what is right. Legal is a contrivance, a crafted fiction created for control. Our founders built America as a nation of laws, but today we are a nation of men who twist words, write codes, and call them law while they erode the very freedoms they swore to protect. Think about that. You can't let your grass grow more than 4 inches tall, which is a legal requirement. You can't own more than 4 cats, which is also a legal requirement. You can't travel without a license. That's legal as well. None of these come from natural law. And the danger is this: when we forget the difference between lawful and legal, we willingly surrender sovereignty. This Constitution Day, we must remember the law exists to defend life, liberty, and property, not to micromanage, restrict, and control. It's time to reject legal schemes that replace law and restore the truth. We are a nation of laws, or we are not free. Words are the battlefield. Every freedom we've lost began with a change in the meaning of a word, whether person, resident, or United States. On paper, these terms mean one thing. In legal codes, they're redefined to pull more people under government control. Here's the truth. If you don't know the words, you don't know the fight that you're in. A de jure governor could stop this. With the authority of the state, he could issue lawful definitions, draw clear jurisdictional boundaries, and block agencies from applying their legal terms to people they don't govern. Imagine a quote-unquote executive office of law, which is language and words, whose sole mission is to preserve the very words that guard our freedom. This Constitution Day, remember, if we preserve the words, we control the future. If they distort the words, they control us. One righteous governor can restore the balance of power. Imagine this: the governor of Virginia issuing a proclamation that state nationals are sovereign and free. He signs the people's personal and official documents, which would be admissible in any court to certify this lawful status and jurisdiction. He orders all state agencies to reject federal schemes like the National ID Act, the Patriot Act, and Obamacare when applied to state nationals. He institutes the Virginia Foreign Agent Registration Act, requiring any federal agent to file their oath, bond, and authority before acting in the state. Do you see it? This is a wall of lawful authority, one the courts would hesitate to breach because it pits federal presumption against state sovereignty. And the Constitution sides with the state. This Constitution Day, we face a choice: greater cooperation with federal overreach or governors willing to go to war for words and rights for their people. The people are sovereign, and sovereigns must be left alone. Many believe America's great experiment is over. They say the damage is done, and for the most part, they're right. A ruling class now decides what's best. They feed dependency and kill the will to be free. But there are those who know true freedom, no ties to the federal machine, minimal, deliberate ties to the state. Remember this: the American Revolution began with just 2 or 3% of the people. If even one state elects a de jure governor, everything changes. Others will follow. Freedom will spread. The choice is ours. We will stay subject or stand as sovereign. Here's the first step. Get the book series known as The Liberty Dialogues and Restoring the American Republic. Read, share, buy a copy for your family. Share this video far and wide. And go to yestohellwith.com for updates and real action steps. Freedom is not gone. It's waiting. It's waiting for you and me to claim it once again. I am James Johnson. I am not a part of the political machine. I do not hold a title that binds me to it. I do not have power that makes me beholden to its club. I am not a lawyer and officer of the court who is forever bound to the system. I am not a career politician chasing a higher seat or a bigger paycheck. What I do have is something rare. I have lived the reality of our broken system. I have fought in state courts and federal courts. I have stood my ground against the machine itself. And yes, I have been sent to prison for a crime that I did not commit. That experience, as unjust and brutal as it was, taught me more about freedom than any law school or political office ever could. It taught me how far the beast will go to keep power and why the only solution is for governors, not Congress, not the courts, to battle that very beast head on. I would not run for governor to enrich myself. I would not seek the trappings of power or the praise of others. I would not accept a salary for serving the people of Virginia. My satisfaction would be the increased freedom of state nationals. My reward would be seeing the chains of unlawful government cast off. My joy would be knowing that Virginia stood as an example to the rest of America, that sovereignty is not dead and liberty can be restored. I would be a governor who owes nothing to the machine and everything to the people. I would reject federal overreach. I would protect the rights of state nationals. I would stand in the gap for those who want to be free. This is not about left or right. It is about right and wrong. It is about whether we will remain subjects or stand again as sovereigns. My name is James Johnson. I am outside the system, and I would fight for the freedom of Virginians come what may. I would fight for the life, liberty, and property of every state national in every state. This is the attitude we need. Americans need those who will radically change what is so horribly wrong. Let us find those men and women and encourage them to become de jure governors. Now that we know what truly constitutes the Constitution of the United States, the path forward is clear. It is high time for de jure governors to rise, to protect state nationals, to honor lawful authority, and to stand as shields against federal overreach. Without them, every man and woman will be presumed a federal citizen, and the Constitution will be reduced to little more than a relic, admired but powerless. With de jure state governors, sovereignty is restored, liberty is defended, and the Constitution lives again as the binding chain upon the federal government, not upon the people. We must restore the American Republic and once again live as a truly free people.